Tonight we're going to talk about two topics that are very closely related and, for lack of a better term, I would say they're kind of hot button topics right now, meaning that they're things that everyone's talking about. Any guesses? As far as within our profession, two really big buzzword topics. One is evidence-based practice. What does that mean? Evidence-based practice.
Providing support for the therapy or evaluations that you're doing.
Right. Do you have research support? Is there evidence from research to support that basically best practices, the things that we routinely do, should be supported by research? You're probably thinking, what we do? No. The vast majority of healthcare professions, including our own, lacks a lot of evidence-based support for the things that we routinely do. Why do we do them? Because it's what we've always done. Why do we do them? Because that's what we learned to do in school. But the fact of the matter is that sometimes things are not as they seem, and things that we've done that we thought really made sense don't. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a child that's very hard to understand, highly unintelligible. Traditionally, what we did was looked at what errors did the kid make on a standard articulation test, and then we targeted those sounds in the positions where the kid had an error. And what happens? It's forever if you have a kid who's highly unintelligible. Well, then someone got the bright idea to look for patterns of errors and discovered that, oh wow, this kid is leaving off the ending sounds of most of his words. Or, oh, this kid is not combining consonant clusters together. Or, oh, this kid's dropping off entire syllables. And rather than working on every individual sound or sound combination, they got the bright idea to teach the kid the rule that he was missing. And guess what happened? The kid's intelligibility rapidly improved. And so people actually did studies looking at what we now call a phonological approach versus the traditional approach for children who are highly unintelligible. And guess what they found? It actually works. So that's just an example. Just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean that we should continue. We have to have evidence for it. And one of the ways that we can obtain evidence to support what we do is related to the second hot button topic, outcomes. How do we know that what we're doing is having an impact? And the easiest way is to compare our outcomes, baseline to the end of intervention, a before and after. You cannot watch TV for more than 1.5 hour program where you're not going to see a Sensa or Nutrisystem or some commercial where they're showing you these some beauty cream or facelift procedure, something where they aren't comparing a before and after. Why? because that's a way that we judge success, if we have a positive outcome. So we're gonna be talking about some things that will help us determine whether or not there's adequate evidence to support some of the things that we do. And we will also be looking at some measures that are available to us for chronicling or outlining our outcomes with patients who have hearing problems. So, again, evidence-based research and practice helps us to look for the best evidence to guide our clinical decision making. And that should be something that we all do. The best type of study, best meaning the most reliable, is a double-blinded, prospective, randomized, controlled clinical trial with repeatable results. So, if you do a study looking at, say, 2 different interventions, you would have to make sure that your clinicians and your patients are blinded, meaning that they are not clued in ahead of time as to which approach they're going to be using. You're going to have to randomly assign individuals to those approaches. You're going to set a specific limit, time limit, number of visits, what have you, very objective criteria governing the use of that intervention or that strategy. And then, after you've analyzed the results, you need to be able to repeat it. You need to be able to do it again and get the same types of results.
What is it if it was double-blinded?
That's where both the subjects that are participating in the study, as well as the examiners who are, or the clinicians who are providing it, are not clued in about the specific purpose other than that we want to try, maybe try this treatment approach. So that it eliminates the possibility of bias. That's basically what we're doing. Despite the fact this is the best type of study, in all practical purposes, it's very difficult to obtain this kind of information or to complete this type of study, particularly if we're talking about intervention strategies. As a result, there's very few clinical trials in our profession and in healthcare in general that meet that standard. So we're going to talk about some of the other, maybe not quite gold standard, maybe the bronze standard or the brass standard of research and evidence that's available out there. But the other thing is we cannot discount our own clinical observations and experience. Sometimes it's perfectly okay to follow Dr. Hahn's rule of thumb, which is if it works, you do it. If it doesn't, you try something else. Sometimes that's all that we have to go by. If we wait as a profession until we have this highest level of evidence before we implement or use any type of procedure, we will never be able to render care because there's, first of all, not enough people out there doing research, and second of all, there's often impracticalities and barriers that would prevent us from doing this highest level. While this is the gold standard and what we should strive for, for all practical purposes, we have to be doing something. Something is better than nothing at all.
I think, what is perspective?
Perspective means that we're actually planning it and carrying it out rather than, so perspective study is when it's live and in motion. So we plan it and then we carry it out. That would be different than going back and looking at the medical records. Let's say we wanted to see, we wanted to look at, trying to think of something that's not necessarily related, but we call that a retrospective study, where we wanted to see, and they do this all the time now, around global warming and climate change. So they look at climate data for different periods of time, different locations, and so that's a piece of information that's really easy to pull out. Does that make sense? So rather than looking back at something that's already been done, we are going to implement something and then take a look at what we get as a result. Does that make sense? Thank you for asking them, because I forget and use some of these terms and try and explain them, but don't always explain what's important. So when we are looking at the evidence, particularly when we're examining evidence related to interventions, we're really concerned about the 3 E's: efficacy, effectiveness, and efficiency. Efficacy means, does the intervention result in a positive outcome? Do we get the results that we would hope for? Effectiveness is, can that outcome be replicated in the real world? So if we move from a laboratory controlled setting, which gives us efficacy, can we move and get similar results in a real world setting? That tells us about effectiveness. And then efficiency is judged by, does that intervention or does that treatment provide a better outcome when compared to other interventions? I will give you an example. I just completed one study where we have completely analyzed it. We've actually presented it. We've done a second phase. But we did a study looking at whether or not, and some of you may have even participated, I know several of you did, where we looked at the results that we obtained from 3 different types of hearing screenings. Traditional hearing screening, where you put the earphones on, you raise the beep every time you hear a sound. And there are only a set number of sounds, and it's presented at a set loudness level, and it's pass or fail. We did a traditional hearing test where we actually sat you in the sound booth and had you listen to different tones and hit the button each time that you heard it to get an actual threshold. That's kind of the gold standard. Then we also used a mobile app that's available for iPads, smartphones, things like that. And we wanted to compare the results because the manufacturer, we were really interested in the mobile app more than the others because there's ample research to show that the traditional hearing test is the gold standard for determining whether or not there's hearing loss. And there's ample evidence regarding the pros and cons of using a set loudness level hearing screening to judge whether or not there's hearing loss. So we wanted, and because the research says, yeah, it's acceptable, go ahead, you can use it with these caveats, we wanted to see how this mobile app would compare. Well, the manufacturer did their own in-house laboratory testing. They used an anechoic chamber, they used folks from their staff that had no idea, what the purpose was or why just said do this, follow. So efficacy had been established by the manufacturer. We jumped in at the effectiveness level because we brought it into a more real-world setting. We wanted to try it on real people outside of a laboratory setting. Although we did use an ideal setting, but it was still a clinical setting, it wasn't a laboratory setting. Now, we just finished another phase of this study where we compared yet another mobile app, but we still did the other three parts. So what we're going to look for is, are we getting similar results from the hearing test over time? We should. Are we getting similar results from the traditional screening? We should. Those have been around forever. Do we get similar results from the original mobile app that we used? Hopefully we should if our data was accurate. And then we're going to add in another variable, which is another type of screening app. So that's kind of how this whole efficacy, effectiveness, and efficiency protocol works. Does that make sense? So we want to know, does it work in the lab? Can you repeat and obtain similar results in the real world? And is the outcome better? Now, the efficiency thing comes in because if we can screen and get reliable results from a mobile app, patients can come to us with results from their own mobile device. Saves us time. Because we, in our clinic, already have several tablets available that we got through grants that costed us nothing, and the apps are free. We don't have to replace our portable audiometers for screening should something happen to them. And we don't have to pay the expense of having it recalibrated every year. Because guess what? The app updates and recalibrates itself. So, can we show, if we can show efficacy and effectiveness, then obviously the efficiency part is going to take care of itself because there's a significant savings. And what's really cool is the person does it themselves. So I don't have to have a staff member or myself doing a hearing screening on them. So we're actually saving salary, overhead. I mean, there's lots. Can you see what I'm saying? So this is why it's important. One of the reasons why. It's not just to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for our patients. That's always paramount. But there are other considerations as well. Okay? So, in oral rehab, what we typically want to do is, first of all, develop a question. Formulate a question. What do we want to look at? In our case, our question was, is a mobile screening app a reliable predictor of hearing sensitivity? And we looked for relevant evidence. And that was a frustrating challenge because there's lots of information out there about screening apps, health screening apps, not a whole lot particular to hearing. And actually when we went to 3 of the major hearing aid manufacturers have put out these screening apps. Only one of them responded at all, and they were willing to share with us their efficacy data and their protocol, which was great. So we're like, okay, well, this is the one we're going to do then. So we didn't find a whole lot of information out there, but what we did find, we were able to use. And so then based on what we do find, we have to determine what level of evidence does it supply, and we'll talk about that. What was the risk of bias? We'll talk about that. And then we'd have to grade it. So we provide a grade. You can actually grade the quality of research. Then we have to look at the big picture and decide, okay, we're making a clinical decision here. Should we do this or should we not? And then you can start that whole process over again with another type of intervention. So the types of questions that we might want to answer in oral rehab are related to intervention. Is this an effective treatment? A diagnostic question. Is this a reliable method of assessment? We might want to look at etiology. Is there a relationship between hypercholesterol levels and hearing loss? Is there a relationship, one of my students proposed, we're going to do this because it's going to be quick and easy and fun. Is there a relationship between gender and response time when hitting the button during a hearing test? I think there is, but we'll see. A safety question. Are zinc air batteries, which are quote unquote non-toxic, safer than mercury batteries? And it might be a cost effectiveness question. It could be a combination of all of these, but those are some of the major areas that we tend to look at in oral rehab. So when you're designing research, or more importantly, when you're assessing research, remember the word PICO. I see some smiles in the back because they're familiar with this. And they're loving it. So the P is for the population. Who's the patient, or what's the population that we're examining? I is intervention. What is the treatment, or what is the intervention, or what is it that we are investigating? The C is for comparison. How does this particular intervention compare to others that are available? And then outcome. Which intervention gives us the best outcome? Okay? Would one of you guys share what your PICO statement was?
Use
Two-part
smartphone and high-tech external memory aids, increase academic performance in adolescent students who have prospective memory impairments following traumatic brain.
So you have to come up with this statement that incorporates your population, what your intervention is, what you're comparing it to, and what your outcome is hoped to be. Okay? In order to be a valid and reliable study, it needs to include those. Guess what? Not every study does. So, when we talk about evidence, we can talk about domestic evidence, meaning stuff that's generated here in the US, or we can talk about international evidence. This is evidence that's generated outside of the US. There's a lot of research in oral rehab that comes out of Western and particularly Northwestern Europe and the Scandinavian countries, because most of the ingredient manufacturers are from those countries, Denmark, Norway. We can talk about generic evidence, which means that it's kind of broadly applicable, not necessarily something that's specific to communication sciences and disorders, but something that's kind of a generally applicable or acceptable principle, or it could be very discipline specific. Okay? So when you're searching for evidence, you can use a macro or a micro search approach. Macro is when you use a broad search. So you might consult Medline, you might consult ERIC, you might consult the Miami Library, you might consult the Ohio Library Network, where you're looking at multiple sources. But then a micro search is when within one of those you start doing further searching. Okay? So your macro is when you kind of try and see what's out there, and then once you start finding some sources, as you start breaking it down further, that's your micro search. Okay? There is a great online resource that you can consult that will help you if you are reading a research article and you would like to grade it, if you'd like to know, it gives you some very specific criteria that you can plug in or look at from your study to determine whether or not it stands the test. There's separate ones for intervention studies, for diagnostics, and for just general experimental design. I don't expect you to look at these now, but I hope that you will save that information, because one of these days you're going to be out there and a parent is going to come to you or a patient is going to come to you and say, I heard about X. And you're going to research it, and you're going to come up with some information, and this is a really good resource to test it against. So, like I said, it's not something that I'm expecting you guys are going to appreciate or use right now. It's one of those ways you might take a look at it. So when we're talking about the levels of evidence, remember we said that we're going to grade our evidence. There are 6 broad categories. The higher the number, the less reliable. None of these are unreliable. I don't want to give you that impression, but some things are better than others. So the best type of study, the most reliable, is the one that we talked about, where you have a systematic review, where it's double-blinded, prospective, randomized, and includes controlled clinical trials. Okay? Then the next level down would be double-blinded, prospective, and randomized. So these, the first one, the big difference is that the first one also critically analyzes the other information, the other similar types of interventions or diagnostics or whatever it is you're looking at in the literature as a method of comparison. The second level is where they just jump in and do that type of a study without necessarily looking at what's happened before. The next level, the third level, is where they do a prospective trial, but they're not randomizing it. So that might be, and that's basically what mine was. It wasn't, what was random about it was the order in which we put them through the different tests, but they were all going through the same thing, so it's not randomized. Does that make sense? Whereas if I wanted to look at, say, 2 different apps and compare the results that we got from the 2 different apps, and I randomly assigned people to one or the other, that would have bumped it up a notch. The next is when you have non-intervention studies. So where you're looking at case studies, when you're looking at like retrospective information, when you're looking at related or similar types of interventions, but you're not actually engaging in a study prospectively, you're examining things that have already happened. Okay, so those tend to be the 4th level. The 5th level is when you look at case studies or case reports. So a lot of our information in speech pathology and audiology fall into that case reports. We need more level 3 and above. That would be the preferred. But a lot of ours fall into the level 4 and level 5. We take a look at what's already happened, and sometimes it was an actual study, and other times it's just a single subject. And then finally, we have expert opinion. Somebody who is a respected, renowned expert says, is my professional clinical opinion that, and that can hold water. Okay? So, when you're next time that you read an article, a research article, think about these things. You know, what level of research or what level of evidence are we going to get from this? And if it's just a case study, I don't mean to say just, but that's not going to be as strong of support than if it were, you know, a double-blinded, randomized clinical trial. Okay? Make sense? One of the things that we have to be concerned about, and it was one of the reasons why I chose to do the screening app study that I did, was out of concern for bias. Because when the manufacturer of this app was developing it and testing it, they didn't farm that out to some outside entity like a university, and which was interesting to me because this particular manufacturer, whenever they come up with a new piece of technology that's supposed to do something differently, like maybe they change their microphone because they're wanting to improve speech understanding, for example, they will typically farm out the study of that to a university training program, and particularly they go to a researcher at the University of Iowa or at the University of Minnesota. But they didn't. So in my mind, even though this is a company that I respect and that has a good track record, it raised a little bit of a red flag in my mind that why is it that most of the things that they do, they farm it out, and they didn't on this one. And that made me suspicious of bias, meaning they have a vested interest in this thing looking good because it can get them some good publicity, and it's not going to make them any money necessarily because it's a free app, but it could make them money in the long term because one of the things that you can do is if the results suggest that you have hearing loss, guess what? Using GPS in your device, it will refer you to individuals in your area, and guess what? The individuals in the area that it refers you to, folks who can count with them. So, in the end, they may end up reaping some benefit from it. So I was concerned about the possibility of bias. When you're reading a research study, you need to account for that. You know, who's actually doing it? Is there a reason to be concerned about possible bias? Most of you have had me for one class or another where we talked about the speakeasy stuttering device, and that was one of the original early criticisms launched at the data regarding the effectiveness of that device. Is most of the initial research came out of East Carolina University, where the device was originally developed. And not only that, but the guy who is the person who stutters, who designed it and came up with it, was involved in all of those studies. So, that was it a valid concern? Yes. Was it a valid criticism? I think the subsequent research has shown no, it wasn't, because now there are independent studies. The point being, you have to consider that. If someone has a vested interest in obtaining a particular outcome, then you have to go into it with your eyes wide open and appreciate that there is always that possibility. People sometimes do fudge their data to make them look good. There's been recent reports where there's been clinical trials with medications, and then suddenly they have to prove the medication because they find out that someone fudged information. So, just be aware. So when you're rating bias, as you look at what went into that study, you're either going to give it a double plus rating, meaning that there's a very low risk of bias, a plus rating, meaning that there is some risk but it's low, or you give it a minus because there's a high risk. So again, those initial studies that came out about the speakeasy, people were giving it a minus because it was, people that had a vested interest were actively involved. The same criticism was initially launched. There's a stuttering intervention called the Lidcombe method. And again, the initial research came out of the Lidcombe Center for Stuttering in Australia and was done by the people who developed it. And so, again, there'd be a higher risk of bias than if someone in the US were designing and testing it out. Does this make sense? So at the end, you're going to give your study that you're looking at a grade. And it's going to be A through D, very similar to the grading system that we use. If the study was a level 1 or 2 and a review of the literature shows that the results are fairly consistent from one study to the other, you can give it an A. If you're seeing consistent conclusions, but we're at level 3 or 4, or they can kind of relate it back to a level 1 or 2 study, then you give it a B. If you have level 5, or if it's something that you can kind of interpret and extrapolate the data from a level 3 or 4, you give it a C, and it's a D if it's level 6, or if there's contradictions or inconclusive results, contradictory results. So basically, what you're hoping for, I personally would be skeptical or hesitant to use something that came out with level D evidence. I wouldn't be thrilled, but I'd be okay with level C. I'd be much happier with something that came out level A or B. Right now, we're studying in my motor speech class, we're starting to talk about intervention strategies for different motor speech problems, and there's a particular intervention called LSVT. And one of the things that I like about it is there's lots of level 1 and 2 intervention studies that have been done in multiple different locations, and they're consistently yielding similar results. So it's something that I feel very comfortable recommending. And so students will say to me, well, there's a conference in Indianapolis that's 2 days long. I can get certified to provide this, and it's going to cost $600. Is it worth it? Yes, absolutely. I feel comfortable saying it is. There are other types of interventions where I'm not as sold based on the evidence that it's necessarily a good investment for them. Someone had a hand up.
Did you say that, who gives them these letter grades?
You would, if you're doing the research. So let's say I give you the topic that I want you to look at the use of personal FM systems versus sound field FM systems on test scores in children with hearing. So you do your search and you come up with, and say there's 5 articles. And all 5 of those articles show that kids use personal FM do better than kids who only have access to sound FM. And out of those 5 studies, 3 of them were randomized clinical trials where they had kids with hearing loss and they were randomly assigned to one or the other. And maybe one of them was a case study of a kid, and maybe one of them was a retrospective study where they looked back at scores. Based on that information, we would provide a grade. And because there was some preponderance of evidence from level 1 or 2, or there were others that we could kind of relate back, that would probably earn a score of B. Because it wasn't exclusively 1 and 2. There were some lower level, but they related back consistently to those same findings, so we give it a B. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Would this be done like before, like it was peer review, it's like peer reviewing? Before
Exactly.
it's published?
Yeah.
Does it have to get a certain grade to be published, or will it be published just knowing that it has to be
Theoretically, but let's say you're one of the big names in oral rehab, like Robert Swetow or Frank Music or Jay Hall or Pat Krikos. You're probably going to have a hard time getting something that's at a level D published. But you may get something at level C published, and you almost definitely get something that would earn a B or a C. The thing is, they don't always look at your particular project in context to really assign a grade. They may look at just what level are you at. So they may just say, when they're looking at whether or not to publish, they may say, oh, okay, well, this is a randomized clinical trial. Okay, I'm all right with that. Or, oh, you're a big name, and this is a case study that you've done. This is worth getting out there because you're a recognized expert. Whereas if I did the same thing and it was a case study, depending on the journal, it may or may not get published because I'm not internationally known in that area. So, but theoretically, peer review should try and look at things contextually, but it doesn't always. Okay, so you kind of see how we can figure out how we use these tools to determine what is quality research and what is not, and help us decide if the evidence that's presented for using a particular strategy or intervention or diagnostic is legitimate. So what I want you to be is a critical consumer. Don't just believe it because it's in print. There are actually people who believe that if it's on the internet, it has to be true. There are people that believe that if it's in print, it must be true. No, that is why God created the retraction. Because sometimes things get out that aren't true. So just keep that in mind. So, as important as evidence is in allowing us to stay true to the ethical principle of beneficence and avoiding the ethical pitfall of maleficence, meaning that we always put our patient first and we do everything that we can to avoid doing harm, evidence is critical to that. But a lot of times, as I said, we lack evidence, so we have to rely on our experience. And experience is a great teacher. And if you've tried a particular strategy before and it has worked, then you're more likely to use it. And that's okay, so long as you keep an open mind about it, and if you discover a case where it's not working, that you're willing to try something else. Okay? And we also have to put forth our patient's autonomy. It's an ethical concern as well. We have to consider their preferences. And so, if I feel that the best intervention for my patient is to use 2 hearing aids with directional microphones, and that patient says, absolutely, there is no way you're going to get them to wear 2 hearing aids, I'm not going to do it, then it's kind of a moot point, because they're not going to do it. Then you have to make the decision, are you going to compromise your recommendations, or are you going to suggest that they will also their care? But that's an extreme example, but it's reality. Patient preferences should enter in. Now, if it's a situation where I feel like the patient needs many behind-the-ear hearing aids with directional microphones, noise suppression, and an open ear canal, well, I can get that from 6 different manufacturers. So maybe there's one, I show them pictures and like, oh, I really like the look of that one. Well, as long as everything else is equal, why would I not go ahead and let them get the one that has better eye appeal for them? You know, that, so it can work both ways. Right? I put some articles up on the resources that you can look at, including the one that's required, so that you can kind of go through this whole process. I'm not going to belabor that and redo it tonight. But anyway, we need to talk about outcomes. Outcomes allow us to judge success. Did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish? Is the patient better off having seen us, having followed our recommendations than they were before? That's one method. But it's important because it may provide evidence that improves our likelihood of obtaining reimbursement from insurance. There are certain procedures that we do now that we didn't used to be able to bill for. Or we could bill for it, but we weren't going to get paid. But now that we can show that there's a good outcome from it, they actually assign it a common procedural term code, a CPT code, and we can bill for it. It can also give patients a sense of assurance that they're getting the best possible treatment, and that in and of itself can then lead to those best practices and provide evidence. Okay? So we have several different measures that we can use in oral rehab. One is called the COSI, or the Client-Oriented Scale of Improvement. And it was developed, as are a huge number of auditory tools and assessments in Australia. So when you see it, you might see if you're going through literature during reviews, anytime you see NAL, it came from the National Acoustics Laboratory, and you're going to be tempted to think, oh, National Acoustics Laboratory, must be somewhere here in the US. No, it's in Australia. But basically what it does is it's designed to be used for hearing aid fitting, but you can adapt it for if you're doing any kind of oral rehab, if you're doing clear speech training, or if you're doing speech reading training, or whatever intervention it is that you might be choosing. But you pick 5 situations or 5 goals that are established before, and then, so let's say the patient says, I want to be able to hear better when I'm driving in the car and talking to my spouse. And the patient says, I want to be able to hear better on the telephone. And the patient says, when I listen to music, I want it to sound recognizable to me. And maybe they pick another one and they say, I want to be able to hear the television at a level that's not obnoxious to my hearing. Okay? So they're just kind of generic goals. Then we do our intervention, no matter what it would be. Maybe it's an assistive device, maybe it's hearing aids, maybe it's you put them through the LACE program, where they do that listening and comprehension enhancement, whatever the case may be. And then we reassess them following that intervention, and we can then judge whether or not we've met the goal. It uses a 5-point scale. And so hopefully we're going to see, if we then add up the score for each of those, obviously it's 5 times however many goals you set. So we set 4, 20 would be the highest, would be the highest possible score we could get. We want to see where we fall. Grace, you were going to ask something.
Oh.
No? Okay. I thought you were. Yes?
If you were dealing with like a pediatric patient, would you ask the parent instead of the child?
Very good, because guess what? There's the COSI C. So yes, there is a pediatric version. What's really cool, exactly that, the parent or another caregiver may now, with an older child, and I usually, first of all, I will not fit children under the age of 4. That's just my own rule. There are folks who are absolute experts, spend their entire day inside the ears of infants. I'm okay with testing them. I'm not real comfortable with fitting. So I like them being walkie-talkie, able to somewhat reason with before, give me some reliable feedback before I'll fit them. But once the child is communicative enough, cognitively intact enough that they can, I definitely want them setting goals. Not that I'm not going to have some parent goals, obviously I will, but I also want to know what's important to that kid. So usually if they're like in the first grade, maybe kindergarten, but definitely by first grade and older, we're gonna have at least one or two goals that they jump in. The really neat thing is several of the hearing aid manufacturers have incorporated this into their fitting software. So we're prompted while we're doing their fitting to actually complete this, and then we'll get prompted again at some point follow-up visits, so if we wanted to update it. So it's really kind of cool. And what's really neat, if you really do use it that way, let's say they come in for their follow-up and they give you some feedback, and you fill it out, and you make some changes in their programming, like their hearing aids, and then they come back again, you can then redo it and see, are our numbers moving in the direction we want, or ooh, did something that we did that time, maybe we were improving, and now all of a sudden we've gone back. So it can really help guide your interventions. And there's examples of the COSI in the resources, so you can see what it looks like. The HAWK is another one. It's the Hearing Aid Users Questionnaire. Again, it was developed at the NAL, and it's a survey that allows the patient to rate their hearing aid experiences. So that they can either circle a number so that it has kind of an objective scale, or it might be a descriptive. So this one's a little bit harder to gauge because not all patients are going to use the same terms. You have to interpret their short answers a little bit more, whereas if it's something like the COSI, it's really just a number and the numbers are consistent. But it's one of those things where it can really, you can use it as a way of deciding future directions, or maybe determining if they need additional interventions. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're seeing some benefit from their hearing aids, but they're really disappointed overall in what's going on. Well, maybe you need to do some counseling on realistic expectations based on their hearing loss. Maybe you need to recommend that they undergo LACE training or something like that. Okay. Another one that is often used is called the AFAB, and it's the Abbreviated Profile of Hearing Aid Benefit. It's a short compared to the regular one, because the FAB is really long. It's 24 items, and it's a 7-point scale. And they rate their listening experiences with their hearing aids versus without. And obviously the goal is that you want improved listening experiences with the hearing aids versus without. And again, I've got links here, but I've also got examples of it in the resources. This one's a cool one. I like to use. We use it a lot at screenings. It's called the HHIE, the Hearing Handicap Inventory for the Elderly. And what it does, for those of you who did my hearing screening, if you noticed in the app there was also that questionnaire which you didn't have to fill out based on this. And it's just a series of 25 questions that they rate 0, 2, or 4. Where it's always, sometimes, and never. And it gives them a statement like, my hearing loss causes conflict within my family. So they're statements, and they have to rate, is this something always, sometimes, or never. Some of them are emotional, so deal with relationships, and others are situational. And it allows you to kind of decide where you need to focus. So, kind of cool. The Hearing Handicap Inventory for Adults is the same, but it's designed for non-elderly. So it's the same type of of inventory, same number of questions, just slightly different. Then we have the SAC, which is the self-assessment of communication. It was developed at Idaho State, and it allows the person, again, to use a somewhat objective 5-point rating scale to assess, to self-assess their communication skills. So it helps you identify where are they having communication breakdowns so that you can best tailor your interventions to fit. So this is definitely one that speech pathologists use as well, because more often than not, the SLPs are the ones that are doing the oral rehab, not the audiologists, simply because Medicare and other insurances typically will not pay for the audiologist to do it, but they will for the speech pathologist. So the SAC is a good one, and again, it's in your resources. Then we have the SOAP, which is the same thing, but from the significant others perspective. And it's a slightly shorter version. But again, it's a really good way to find out if everyone involved is on the same page. There are, on the NAL website, which I've given to you, there's tons of forms that you can download and use. I would strongly recommend that you bookmark that site if you are going to at all be engaging in oral rehab, so that you have access to it. Questions about outcomes or about the research and levels of validity and reliability.
How do you know if it's evidence-based practice, like if you go on Google and go under Google Scholars and see if it's evidence-based or not? Like, how do you know that?
Well, typically it's based on other people's assessments. So you might have to, if you, let's say you're interested in a specific treatment, like clear speech,
Yeah.
okay, then what you would probably want to do is Google effectiveness or reliability or evidence supporting clear speech techniques.
Okay.
And it's going to give you some articles that will discuss that and tell you, hopefully, whether or not it came out looking good. Otherwise, if it's something that you're interested in, and you're trying to figure out, you're going to actually have to look for articles, and then after having researched a number of them, kind of draw your conclusion. What level would I grade this? Is it looking like it's something I should do? Give you an example. One of the things that I was trained to do back in the dark ages was to use oral motor exercises for both speech and for swallowing problems. Well now, because that's what we always did, well now there's a lot of research that says that yes, those oral motor exercises can be extremely effective in the treatment of swallowing problems, but that particularly if they're designed to improve strength, they're not going to have a dramatic impact on speech because we need such minuscule amount of our articulators' potential strength in order to produce intelligible speech that they're not very effective. That if we're doing speech, oral speech activities that are embedded in speech and are designed for coordination, for range of motion, some other things, then yes, they may be effective, but to do them just to improve strength, well, it doesn't matter. I can talk with some weakness of my lips, and so things are not moving quite as well, and you may hear a slight difference now compared to a moment ago, but at the end of the day, is that really going to change significantly my speech intelligibility? No. And particularly if you've never met me before and that was the difference that you got, does it really make a difference at the end of the day? Probably not. So, other questions? I'm trying to get all of us out here before White Death arrives, because they keep moving up the time. But it's supposed to be like 7 o'clock is when it's supposed to start.